We're all on.
We're all here.
Hi, We're all-
Uh,
So,
We're
welcome everybody to Parlor Tea. Sorry
happy.
for the weird, you know, array of whatever. It just that, as you know, podcasts have glitches, and we appreciate Sarah for always being our go-to girl.
thanks.
And then after trying to discuss what we were going to do, um, Genevieve was like, "But I do some of that on my ghost tour, Christmas ghost tour." So we have two things to say: Christmas ghost tour and Ugly Sweater Day is December 7th, and
Yes.
like,
In
share,
Keyport.
follow, and Keyport. Like, share, and follow. I did it.
There. There you go.
That was my, but we wanted to come up with something really cool, and Sarah thought, which would be really great, was frozen Charlottes,
I'm
which
obsessed with these. I'm obsessed.
They're awesome.
Yeah.
which are really cute, and I didn't realize it until after we talked about it a little bit that there is a lot of collectors of these types of things.
Hmm.
So I don't want to step on anything that Sarah has done or written about it. So Sarah, take it away.
All right. So it's cold. And that's super appropriate for what we're going to discuss today. You guys had mentioned frozen Charlottes. And what frozen Charlottes are, um, if you look them up on the internet, you are almost sure to get this very creepy, elaborate story. And what this story tells is of these small little white porcelain dolls that were used by the Victorians to teach their children discipline. And the reason that they're called frozen Charlottes is because the name and the lesson of listening to your parents is
So,
because these little white dolls were inspired by the death of a young woman who froze to death. Creepy. And something that we are very, very easy to believe came from the Victorians, this connection of these little dead dolls and this story of a young woman freezing to death and being used for discipline. But the actual story of the frozen Charlottes, it's kind of interesting because you have these two very separate things that kind of got merged together when it came to the States and kind of gave way to this fable of the frozen Charlottes. So in February 1840, February 8th, 1840, the New York Observer printed this story. And the story was true. Obviously, it was being printed in the newspaper about this young woman who was going to a New Year's Eve ball with her boyfriend, and the destination was about 20 miles from where this woman lived. And her mother told her, she was all dressed up, ready to go to this New Year's ball, and she was warned by her parents, wear some blankets. It's very, very cold out. And the girl refused. She said that she didn't want to wear the blanket. She was all dressed up. She'd be fine. Well, what happened was by the time they got to the ball, the guy turned to her and found that she had frozen to death on the way to this New Year's ball. Horrible, tragic story of this young woman's death, but it was one that, for whatever reason, really grabbed people. It really, really drew a lot of attention. This tragic tale of this woman, and it was printed all over newspapers here in the States, and also over in England. And in 1841, this woman named Seba Smith. She went by the name Seba Smith. Her actual name was Elizabeth Oak Smith. She was an American writer, and she knew of this story of this young woman who had frozen to death on this open carriage ride to this ball. And she was very, very inspired by it to the point that she wrote this very long poem. There are a lot of accounts that say that she is the one that actually named the two in the carriage, Charlotte and Charlie. And this poem, it did this chain reaction. We had this newspaper article of this tragic tale inspired this woman to write this poem. This poem then went on to further inspire a lot of American folk songs about this young girl who froze to death on the way to the ball because she didn't want to cover up her dress. It was reprinted again in 1843, and from there it took off. It went, like I had said, it went through a lot of different folklore, a lot of different songs that were written about it. It really became this kind of mythical figure. So how did this story end up getting tied to these small bisque porcelain dolls? So in the 1850s in Germany, there was a toy company that started making these small porcelain dolls, and they were called penny dolls. They were very small. They were approximately 1 inch to 1.5 inches tall. They were made of this glossy bisque. It was glossed on one side typically, and then the other side was left untouched. And these were just a very inexpensive plaything for kids. They were very small, penny dolls. They were inexpensive. One of the big features was that they could go in a bathtub with a child because they could float. And that's why you'll see some of them, the more elaborate ones, came with little miniature bathtubs. Now, they were still used somewhat as you should listen to your parents. There were some that were, besides bathtubs, there were some that came in coffins, little tiny coffins, and they would have sayings on them like, "Don't talk so much," and "Listen to your parents," etched in the coffin. So we have these little tiny bisque dolls. They started production in Germany in approximately 1850. And when they came over to the States, they took off. They were being baked into cakes as a symbol of good luck. You would cut open a dessert on your birthday, and if you found this little tiny creepy white figure in your dessert, it was good luck for the rest of the year. You wanted to find this little corpse-looking creature in your dessert. That was a great thing. But what happened was, what's that?
Who doesn't?
Yeah, right? I mean, yay! But we have these penny dolls, and then we have the story of this girl who froze to death. And when the two merged here, it turned into this tale of Frozen Charlotte. And if you look back on all of these histories of these little penny dolls, these little bisque figures, they actually didn't start to be called Frozen Charlottes until around the 1940s. So this is something that really sat and simmered in this kind of American collective thought space until they started associating the two together, and then it became the Frozen Charlottes. Took on this whole new persona of these were these little corpse dolls in memory of this girl, and it's easy for us to put the two together. We know that the Victorians had a very interesting relationship with the concept of death, especially if it was a younger person. So this is how we took the two and we merged them into the legend of the Frozen Charlottes.
So some of the things I've heard is that a lot of times people will find them actually buried.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And one of the things I had also heard is that children would play funeral with them.
Mm-hmm. Yep. I mean, some of them came with their own little caskets, so it's like an accessory.
So what was the reason
Barbie's
behind
casket?
What was the reason behind putting them in your, like, who came up with the concept of putting them in your cake or pastry or birthday cake?
I'm not sure. My idea is maybe because it was a plaything. It was a toy. It was something that people looked forward to finding. And I mean, we see similar things today with like the king cake and other cultures that have small toys and trinkets put into baked goods.
And that goes
that's my
back
theory.
Hundreds and hundreds of years, that concept.
Yeah. Yep.
So I can understand the sort of keeping in with the discipline, you know, of trying to discipline your children, excuse me, to sort of listen to your parents, listen to your mother, what they say goes, kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm just, you know, so they collected these things. It was very morbid to have children really do this type of thing, right? Like,
well,
I mean,
Morbid
Yeah,
was a
I mean,
definition.
it was there every day, and I mean, to the German company that was making them, and the people in Germany and Europe that were doing this, it was just a toy. It was a inexpensive plaything that their kids could play with. It could go in a bath so it wouldn't get destroyed, and it just morphed. It's this timing of when these things came into play and when they came to the States and when this tragedy happened to this young woman, and it all just merged together into this idea and this legend of the frozen Charlottes.
So, as this being one of them, right? Why is it such a fascination for people today to be fascinated by that macabre feeling of during the Victorian time? Why were they so engrossed in all these weird, you know, you know what I mean, like all this weirdness of death and control in some form?
That is a huge subject of why the Victorians liked death.
I don't think they necessarily liked death. I think they were
Yeah.
surrounded by it in a different way, and I think that they had such rigid traditions around death and customs that I personally think are absolutely beautiful in some ways, like the changing of your clothing and the decorations around your home if someone has passed. I think it's such a powerful way to let somebody know, like, hey, I'm grieving. Maybe speak to me a little bit differently, or be mindful of that.
Yeah, they were much more open about it than a lot of other time frames and a lot of different cultures. They really kind of embraced it and acknowledged this feeling and this practice, and they really acknowledged those couple steps that people have to take after a loss. And today, unfortunately, it is something that is not talked about as much and can be seen as very taboo. The Victorians acknowledged it, and they kind of had to. They were living in a very tumultuous time, and it was something that was very present everywhere.
One of the things I really find interesting about that, though, is around that time is also when death became separated from the home.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So it went from having funerals and wakes and things like that in the home to external funeral homes. And that's where the shift that has kind of resulted in how we handle it today has really started. But that's a whole different show. That's a whole different show we can get into.
So they were just these little porcelain dolls, right?
Yes.
And they were nude.
Yes.
Right. They didn't have clothing.
There were some companies that would paint different hairstyles and different features on them. Those were more so later. As time went on, they did get a little bigger. They originally started very, very small, and I actually have some to show you from my little collection. These were excavated from Germany, from the grounds of a former factory. I don't know how well you can see them with the light, but
they're like little ghosts from here.
Which is still good.
But they were these very small little figures, and then as time went on, they did get bigger and they got more detailed. You had ones that had different hairstyles painted on, facial features started to be painted on. Sometimes they would only paint on shoes for some reason, and they would get bigger, they would get a little more detailed. And then they stopped production early 1900s, approximately 1910, 1920, is when they really kind of faded out of collective use.
So, how many do you have?
I have 12.
Oh.
Yeah, and they're in various stages of being broken. As I said, they were excavated. And you can still find these. If you go online, if you go on eBay, you'll find lots of multiple frozen Charlottes for sale. Yeah.
I may have just been looking them up right before we got on here.
Yep.
They're not that expensive, but they're actually really very creepy and pretty at the same time.
Yeah, they definitely have an air to them, especially these early ones that are just plain faced, no detail to them, and just these figures. You can't move their arms, you can't move their legs. They're just these tiny little white ghostly figures that some people like to link to this horrible tragic story that happened, but also put them in cake. So there you go.
How do you know when you find them how old they are? Like the ones that are faded or the ones that are older? Or?
The older ones, from what I understand, are the more basic ones. The ones that are just white bisque figures, the more basic. And then as it went on, they got more elaborate with painting and details of the face and the size too.
Okay.
Yeah. I don't know exactly how old these are. They're older. They're definitely older, but I'm not sure how old these guys are.
Oh, I mean, people collected them in like large amounts of them, or were there just small amount? Like,
I mean, now people like to collect a lot of them. They're something that people do seek out to. I mean, that's what I did. I specifically sought out purchasing a lot of them that were excavated. There are people that will find them a lot of times during like renovations, or if the ground is being dug up for any kind of construction or anything, you'll hear about people digging up these little figures. So they are sought after. People do like them and collect them.
I mean, it's kind of like a little hunt, that people like to do.
Yeah, it's like a creepy little corner of antiquing, finding these little corpsey dolls.
But I bet you people probably found some of these and kept them and don't know what they really were.
Oh, I'm sure. I'm sure people dug them up and were just like, well, this is weird. I'm going to hold on to this.
Oh, this is weird. I'm going to get rid of this.
Yeah.
So, were there other kind of like, because I know that they did, hi, Dominic. You know how they always used to do like that piñata, right? That they used to find toys and stuff in it. That was sort of the idea of the pastry things. But did they not also put like money in there too? Because I'm sure, like, what does the little boy want to do with the little doll?
Well, there were frozen Charlottes, but there were also frozen Charlies. There were both male and female versions of the frozen Charlottes.
Oh, okay.
Were they? Yeah. I don't often see the Charlies though. I often see the Charlottes.
Yeah, I see Charlottes a lot more than I'll see Charlies.
Well, I mean, if the guys got the Charlies, they probably threw them on the floor or, threw them at something. You know what I mean? The girls played with them and kept their toys a little bit differently. So, I don't know. Did the dolls evolve into something like the bigger porcelain dolls? Is that how the porcelain dolls sort of evolved into the larger?
That's a good question. If our modern day porcelain dolls,
I think porcelain dolls kind of predated frozen Charlottes.
Frozen Charlottes.
Yeah. I think so, because there's porcelain dolls that are a lot older.
Okay.
True.
Kind of interesting in its own right that people would collect things like that. I don't know. You have any haunted ones?
I mean, not that I know of, but I do have a little bag of them over here. So I'm sure. I don't know how I would differentiate this bringing something in as opposed to some of the other stuff in my house. So I'm not sure.
Let's just say someone wanted to go digging for these things. Where would they go to dig for these things? Just to try to go on a
Um,
scavenger hunt.
I mean, if you were in Europe, any of the old sites of the factories that would make them, but here you'll read about people finding them when they're doing like massive renovations of a house or digging up old locations where some of these older houses were. It's similar to how you hear about people like digging up a yard and they find like belt buckles and coins and glasses. These were just an everyday object, and like a lot of everyday objects, they got lost
Mm.
and swallowed up by time.
Or they were playing funeral and they buried them in the backyard.
There you go.
Oh,
You know, with the story around it and how the stories evolved throughout time, and how they probably weren't even intended the way that people take them to be at this
Yeah.
point. It kind of reminds me of the Victorian tear bottles that everyone raves about.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Everyone raves about these. There's this romanticized story of these beautiful bottles that widows would capture their tears in, and they never really existed. They were perfume bottles that we kind of assigned this tragically romantic.
Yeah, and it
story
goes to how we're so willing to assign these very, as you said, these very romanticized versions because we're like, oh yeah, the Victorians were weird. Of course they did that.
And especially with the Victorian era, we assigned so much romanticism to it and all of this grandeur and all of this. When meanwhile, these people were painting their houses with arsenic and dying from arsenic poisoning. So.
Yeah.
The funny
they were pretty.
They were gorgeous. They were poison.
The funny part of the whole thing is that there's so much fantasy and so much wrapped around the Victorian era, more so than I think a lot of other time frames in life, because of their quirkiness and their something that we find kind of odd and off-putting. They really, like Sarah said, embraced it, which some people would embrace at this point in time. That's why I think there's a connection and a fascination to this time frame, more than others. I mean, you could put it on the list of maybe the top 5. Am I wrong? It's silent.
No, I mean,
I'm just wondering what time period is going to be romanticized in the future, like we romanticize the Victorian age. That's my question.
It'll still be the Victorians because they did a lot of really cool things.
Yeah.
And also, I mean, think about it too. There was such a shift into modernization at that time too. So that was really like that pinnacle of where society kind of tipped over the edge, and we became, with the industrialization and all that stuff. That's kind of, I think, where we became more. We can relate to them a little bit more than we could to like the medieval times or, the Renaissance, because it was starting to become more like modern society.
Right. But I think there's definitely a beauty in all of things. But this one, I think everybody, sort of lingers in and sort of.
Well, we do.
Yeah. Because their oddities even made it so beautiful. Like taking hair and doing, the Victorian hair art. I mean, just beautiful. That's people don't do that.
And I mean, you see this woman who talking about just taking something and turning it into this thing of beauty. She read a newspaper article about a girl who froze to death, and what she did with it was she turned it into a poem that she entitled, by the way, "A Corpse Going to a Ball" was the name of it.
Honesty is good.
Yeah, straightforward. Tells you what you're in for.
Yeah, there you go. But was it a long poem? Do you have the poem, or?
I do have the poem. I can read it if you'd like, or I can read part of it. It is a little long. But
read a little of it.
Okay, I'll read a little bit of it.
Taste of it.
A corpse going to a ball. Young Charlotte lived by the mountainside, a wild and lonely spot. No dwelling there for 3 miles round, except her father's cot. And yet on many a winter's eve, young swains were gathered there, for her father kept a social board, and she was very fair. Her father loved to see her dressed as prim as a city belle, for she was all the child he had, and he loved his daughter well. 'Tis New Year's Eve, the sun is down, why looks her restless eye so long from the frosty window forth, as merry sleighs go by? At the village inn, 15 miles off, is a merry ball tonight. The piercing air is cold as death, but her heart is warm and light. And brightly beams her laughing eye as a well-known voice she hears, and dashing up the cottage door, her Charlie's sleigh appears. Now, daughter dear, her mother cried, this blanket round you fold, for 'tis a dreadful night abroad, you'll catch your death a cold. Oh nay, fair Charlotte said, and she laughed like a gypsy queen. To ride with blankets muffled up, I never could be seen. My silken cloak is quite enough, you know 'tis lined throughout, and then I'll have a silken shawl to tie my neck about. Her bonnet and her gloves are on, she jumps into the sleigh, and swift they ride by mountainside and over the hills away. There's life in the sound of the merry bells as over the hills they go, by a creaking wail the runners make as they bite the frozen snow. How long the bleak and lonely way, how keen the wind does blow, the stars did never shine so cold, how creaks the frozen snow. With muffled faces silently, 5 cold long miles they've passed, and Charles with these few frozen words, the silence broke at last. Such night as this I never saw, the reins I scarce can hold. And Charlotte, shivering faintly, said, I am exceedingly cold. He cracked his whip and urged his steed more swiftly than before, and now 5 other dreary miles in silence passed o'er. How fast, said Charles, the freezing ice is gathering on my brow. But Charlotte said, with a feebler tone, I'm growing warmer now. And on they went through the frosty air and glittering cold starlight, and now at last the village inn and the ballroom are in sight. They reached the door, Charles jumped out and holds his hand to her. Why sits she like a monument, no hath power to stir? He called her once, he called her twice, she answered not a word. He asked her for her hand again, but still she never stirred. He took her hand in his, O God, 'twas cold and hard as stone. He tore the mantle from her face, the cold stars on her shone. Then quickly to the lighted hall her voiceless form he bore. His Charlotte was a stiffened corpse, and words spoke nevermore.
That's the whole thing?
That's the whole thing. I just went for it.
Bravo. That's cool. That's a great, it was very visual in my head. Like I got what they were trying to say. I thought it was nice.
Oh. It starts off all... Go ahead.
It's kind of like when you're a teenager and your parents are like, put on your coat when you go out. And you're like, no,
Don't go out in the cold with your hair wet.
Yeah.
I just, I guess from all the wind, I didn't realize she didn't just to nudge him and do something. Like he didn't have. It's like he had a sled and he didn't have
She wasn't gonna do it. She wasn't have any of those blankets.
I feel like the whole thing really takes that turn with that line where, how fast, said Charles, the freezing ice is gathering on my brow, but Charlotte said with a feebler tone, I'm growing warmer now.
Yeah,
it's like,
I went, that's hypothermia.
That's where the whole thing turns right there.
Yeah.
Corpse going to a ball, 1843.
And the moral of the story is, children, listen.
Wear your coat.
When in doubt, wear a coat.
When you're in the sled, wear your coat.
Wear your coat.
There you go.
Got some gloves? Go for those too. Be warm.
So besides that was very interesting and different, and it was kind of spooky and kind of, it was
a little bit of winter creepies. Yeah.
It was sort of like, I don't want to ruin my clothes.
I'm in my dress.
Yeah, hello. It's just, was there a lot, Genevieve, of that whole haunty, creepy storytelling of these types
Oh my goodness. Even before Christmas Carol, it was such a popular thing to tell ghost stories at Christmas time hundreds of years.
Yep.
Part of it being that we're now transitioning into that darker side of the year where we're coming out of Halloween, where the veil is the thinnest. We're going into that space where it's so cold, you have probably a good chance that you will die. And people would gather up together and they would tell each other these creepy stories, almost like, sharing their fears and externalizing their fears, but also as cautionary tales. I mean, this right here is a cautionary tale. And
Your mortality was a lot closer in the
more
winter
fragile.
months back
Yes.
then. Yeah.
We have no idea now how spoiled we are.
Yeah.
So we would say a lot of the Victorians were witchy. Okay.
They were far more closely in tune with the natural forces of the world. Let's put it that way.
Okay, that's good.
Except Charlotte here, who was all
Except
like,
Charlotte.
"Oh, I'm fine."
Yep, except Charlotte.
Has anybody tried to contact Charlotte?
I love how everyone Victorian is named either Charlotte, Emily, or Elizabeth.
Or
It's
Genevieve?
like those are like the three big ones.
Genevieve.
Yeah, there's some Genevieves too, but
Yeah.
or Amelia. Amelias are another one.
Yeah, yeah.
Hmm.
I do wonder where she came up with and why she chose Charlotte and Charlie. I know there were some accounts that said that was the actual name of the girl who passed, but I've read other things that say that there was no reported name. So I am curious if that was her name.
It's kind of I don't know if either one of you has seen it. When I heard the story, it reminded me of the Guillermo del Toro movie, Crimson Peak. Did you ever see it?
It's a good movie.
Mhm.
It is. That's a movie that it brings you right back to that time frame of that old Victorian and storytelling and love and romance.
Oh,
And
that's my favorite.
Yeah.
that movie was considered a horror love story.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. That's my favorite. It's my favorite type of stories, horror love stories.
That's
beautiful.
what this is a horror love story.
I thought it was beautifully done based off of that older part of certain things like the moths and the dancing of it and the I think that it was just romantically horrific in its own way.
That's my aesthetic.
That's your kid. Tragic.
Horrifically beautiful. That's my
That's what we have to write on your grave.
yes.
Horrifically beautiful.
Yes.
The Parlour. No.
The Parlour.
So, I mean, I know it's short, and Genevieve loves that we're short stuff, not the long things. But
context, please. The shorter shows because we can replay them.
Not everybody's a pervert, Genevieve.
It wasn't that. I was just trying to give clarity to your statement.
But yeah, I thought it was really great. If anybody has any kind of ideas or something that we want to discuss or talk about, because I thought that we would talk about Christmas horror movies and discuss those, but Sarah didn't see a lot of those.
We know somebody who has. We'll discuss offline.
We do.
Yeah. Well, I think that's right.
I think Christmas ghost stories are another really good one. We are actually doing an open mic ghost story night at the shop on December 13th, Friday the 13th. But I have books and books and books of Victorian ghost stories. Christmas, they would put out journals full of ghost stories.
I think it's very interesting. Why would they do that? If you don't mind me asking, then we can go. Like, why did they tell ghost stories during that time frame of when it's supposed to be like joyous and family
Because it
and
wasn't just joyous. You're, like I said before, you're moving into like that really scary time of year. This might be the last time the family gets together before they hit that dead of winter.
That
So
idea of like death was, in one way or another, was a constant underlying theme in their life. So it was just what time of year they really went all in on it, or if they were easing out of it. But it was a constant thought. And I mean, this is another thing we could, talk for hours about. But it was just, you also had things happening in the world like the Civil War, where there was a lack of closure. You had this collective kind of trauma. It was something that was just kind of an ever present thing in their lives.
And as far as ghosts, when you think about that, if you've got, you have tragic deaths and untimely deaths, which people often attribute to ghost stories, but you've also got the concept of, if I tell a ghost story about someone that I care about, they're living on through that story. And that's another thing that I think links people very closely to the tragic, beautiful love story, ghost story. Like it carries that emotion forward, and it gives the grief a place to live.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's really important for people. And I think that is something that we have kind of lost touch with in modern society.
Yeah. I mean,
not us, because we live it, but
it's almost like it's almost like the telling of these stories became like another kind of oral history for people.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. And it ritualizes it. It ritualizes the process, the memorial process, and all of that too. I mean, that's why I love telling the ghost stories on my ghost tour. It keeps that alive.
Mm-hmm.
Right. It's interesting. They were very inspiring in many ways, because they tell these stories, but these stories were stories that were probably personal stories of ghost things and stories about what they experienced. And, actually what it's written down in journals, the continuing of that is like a legacy of some sort and keeps that whole history alive.
Yeah. There was such a thirst for that sort of entertainment as well. I mean, think about that. There's no TV, there's no radio. A lot of people associate Edgar Allan Poe with being this like starkly macabre author. He wrote a lot of other stuff, but the things that survive is all the macabre stuff, and that's what the public wanted at the time. That's why he wrote so much of it, just because that's what people wanted. So there was some kind of drive in society for that entertainment.
It's kind of sad that he became such a notable author, and it only was after he had passed.
Well, he was still alive when he was kind of well known, but he didn't have money.
That's sad.
The starving artist.
Yeah.
We know.
Yeah.
We
And
know
then
the feeling.
now the amount of money that he could have had.
Yeah. Well, it's not always about the money, right?
True. But like I said, Sarah, thank you very much. I thought it was kind of nice and interesting to do a little something, because I know it's getting to a point that people are going to be busy and wrapping and buying, and
They can buy at the Parlour. We'll wrap it for them.
There you go.
we appreciate it. But, it's
you gotta make some little sleighs for some frozen Charlottes.
Damn.
That would be so cute. Little popsicle stick sleighs.
That'd be kind of funny. All blue. Now I understand, like, they had a Living Dead doll, and it was called Frozen Charlotte, and it was
now you get it.
There you go.
I never knew about Frozen Charlottes till Sarah brought it up. So it's
I'm
kind
sure
of-
her corset didn't help the situation either.
No, but she's
She was pretty.
nope. Can't wear that blanket. I am dressed up.
Yeah, but they said she was dressed up to the nine.
Uh,
So
I should also note that there, according to some accounts, that after she did pass, that Charlie, he also passed several months later.
See, that makes it even more tragically beautiful. That gets
There
you
you
into
go.
the whole Annabelle Lee mind frame.
Yep, exactly. I was gonna say that. Yep.
I'm too goth for my own good. I gotta go.
yeah. Well, on that note, so this is a short one, everyone. So we appreciate Sarah. Thank you very much for
Thanks,
coming
Sarah.
on.
Oh, thank you. I absolutely appreciate so much you guys having me on to talk about all the weird stuff. I love it. Thank you
We
so much.
appreciate it. And you can find your frozen Charlottes coming to the parlor, but you can also find them on eBay, and Etsy has them. So it's kind of fun to bring back that memory of a little, of some girl, and then sort of pay homage to her during a birthday. I think that'd be kind of fun, and for someone to do that too. So,
Yeah.
but thank you.
Thank
We'll
you.
see you next time on Parlor Tea. Thank you. Have a good
Thank
night, everyone.
you. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.